I think AI could be a useful way of testing whether there's a likelihood of conflict. First, it's a great way to measure and test the values different segments get from your brand, which segments exist, what values do they care about, how are they talking about you on social media. You could pick up on conflict sooner, do scenario planning with it, create separate messaging with it for different segments. I think it could be a really useful tool for preventing and managing conflict if it does occur, for sure.
Welcome to The Ripple Effect, the podcast that takes you on a journey through the minds of Wharton faculty. I'm your host, Dan Loney, and in each episode, we'll be diving deep into the inspiration behind the groundbreaking research that Wharton professors have conducted and exploring how their findings resonate with the world today. There has been an increasing importance on brand. Companies are thinking about more and more these days, and part of that focus comes from a wide range of needs by consumers. That means that different people are wanting different things from their brands. So how do you ensure the necessary level of growth as a company with so many kind of chefs in the kitchen? Pleasure to be joined right now by Annie Wilson. She is a co-author of a new book about this topic. The book is titled The Growth Dilemma, Managing Your Brand When Different Customers Want Different Things. Annie, along with her colleague Ryan Hamilton, wrote this book. Annie is a senior lecturer in marketing here at the Wharton School. Annie, great to talk to you today. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing very well. I've kind of sensed this change and more of a greater focus on brand as well with some of the things that we've seen go on. But you take it from a very unique perspective of how the companies are trying to assess a lot of this because of what the consumers want. Give us more.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the sort of conversation between should we focus on brand or sales or performance marketing, as it's sometimes called, has been a long conversation in marketing and in business in general. But I think recently we've seen this greater imperative to focus on brand because of how big brands are struggling as a result of kind of taking their focus off of brand for a while. We see this with Nike, we see this with Starbucks. Kohl's might be another recent example. And so the approach we're taking is also focusing on brand at the segment level. So not just thinking of your brand as this monolithic thing that all consumers are going to want the same thing from it and think of it in the same way, but that actually different segments might care about different things from the brand. And that might be one of the drivers of fragmentation or brand dilution.
So what are these specific segments? Because you have 4 of them, I believe, in the book.
So the segments are different for every brand, but we talk about 4 different relationships between segments. So segments can relate to each other by what we refer to as separate communities. So they want different things from the brand, but they're fine with the other community also using the brand. If you think about Timberlands, for example, you have hip hop fans and you have workers. They both know that each other uses Timberlands and they're totally fine coexisting in the Tim space. You could have an example at Wharton. You have students who go to Wharton and students who go to the college in various majors. They know about each other. They don't care about each other. They coexist even though they want different things from the university. We then have connected communities. So this is when segments rely on each other to create value, but they don't really care about who each other are. So think about if you're on LinkedIn, there may be people from different industries. There are different people on LinkedIn that you're not connected to. You don't necessarily care about. They use it for different purposes. But the fact that more people are on it is still better for you. So you're connected in this interdependent way. You then have leader follower, so which is one segment uses the brand, which attracts another segment to it. So the fact that this cooler, smarter, more athletic, professional, wealthier segment uses the brand makes everybody else who wants to be like them use it. This happens a lot in luxury and in sports too. And then you have incompatible segments, which is the fact that one segment's using the brand doesn't work with another one. They either want to use it in a different way, they think of the brand differently. There's something that they cannot coexist within the brand ecosystem. And that's where that growth dilemma happens when there's that incompatibility.
And so for the companies that are dealing with this, I don't think this is a relatively new concept that they've had to deal with, but obviously there's a great deal more focus on a lot of these components, correct?
Absolutely. And it's you're right. It's not a new concept, but you see as the pressures to grow and grow quickly are increasing, that the problem is presenting itself sooner in the corporate history. And because consumers come and go between brands a lot faster than ever before, and there's more and more competition, there's lower barriers to entry across virtually all industries. It makes the problems more consequential for brands.
So you mentioned about Timberland, where you can have a product where two totally different segments will use the product and they'll get along, and there's really not a competition. There are instances where there is competition within the brand, and maybe the two sides don't like it. That one side is using it over the other, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And that can be for different reasons. So one of the most famous examples is with Starbucks, with the third placers and the on the goes or the commuters. If I use Starbucks because I want coffee quickly and I want to place my mobile order and get in and out, that doesn't create a nice environment for the third placers. So they have to find a way for them to coexist. Another example, sort of like Tim's, could be Supreme, where if skaters want to use Supreme to signal their skater identity, and then all of a sudden a bunch of wannabe hype beasts and fashion followers use it, that erodes the brand for the skater community. So it actually takes something away from them for them to use it.
So how does a company then balance all of these things going on when that level of growth, that bottom line growth, is the most important thing that the company's looking for, and obviously the board of directors and in many cases the investors is looking for?
Yeah, I mean that's the big challenge, and I think you see that with these big companies now that are struggling with this, is that in all likelihood it's going to take some stepping back to move forward. I actually see what I've observed is the companies that handle the growth dilemma very well are those that are not under this intense pressure to grow quickly. Berkshire Hathaway companies, for example, do a great job of growing within kind of a latitude of acceptance slowly over time to attract different types of customers. For those who do want to grow more quickly, it's about being more selective about the segments you grow to, knowing your brand, understanding what customers value and whether those values are compatible with each other or not, and being smart of knowing when to attract a customer and when to let them go in terms of segments, or orchestrating them in creative ways. So with Timberlands, they keep the different groups separate from each other. They have different social media handles, different marketing, different product lines. You see that with Starbucks and the drive-throughs, and then the roastery or reserve coffee shops designed for the third placers. You're sort of separating them, or you create hierarchy. So you say, this segment is wealthier and higher status, so they're going to have access to certain products that this segment doesn't. And then that makes keeps everybody kind of happy when those segments come in.
So it sounds like the recognition of a lot of these dynamics is one of the important keys to try and find that growth longer term.
Absolutely. And I think the problem has many origins, but one of the common origins is just not engaging in proper segmentation as a brand, or not using value based segmentation. So thinking, okay, we're going to target Gen Z, and then not foreseeing how they might conflict with another segment, because that's not a useful way to think about the segment, because it's really about whether the values or what they want from the brand are compatible or not.
You mentioned the leader follower, which caught my attention, and I wanted to bring that up as well. And I guess to a dynamic, is that part and parcel with what we're seeing kind of in our world right now with kind of the influencer community? Influencers are obviously connecting with different products, then their followers see it, and that's where you're seeing some of that growth come from.
So it's interesting because influencers can be a leader segment or not. So if someone is clearly paid to endorse or use a product, or they're really representing just themselves, they usually don't represent a full leader segment. But when it feels like a segment of celebrities or athletes or wealthy people use a brand, so Beats headphones is a good example. Yes, some of the athletes are paid to use Beats, but it also is a whole segment of professional athletes that love Beats, which makes people like me who want to feel like Tom Brady before I go in to teach want to use Beats headphones. And so it does have to feel like a true segment. It can't just be, oh, Tom Brady was paid to tell me he likes these.
How does a company then deal with the scenario you also lay out where you have incompatible segments? That I would think that would be the largest challenge for them.
Yes, always better. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. That's true in marketing too. I think, yeah, in that case, you have to find ways to separate them, create that hierarchy, or potentially fire a customer segment, which can feel scary, but sometimes the best thing to do is say, we have to choose the segment we're for and the segment we're not for. a big mistake I see brands make over and over again is they find themselves in conflict, and so they try to just serve both. You saw this with Bud Light a couple years ago. You see this with Target right now, where they got themselves in a political conflict between segments, and they responded with a court sort of, well, we don't know which side we're going to pick. So then both segments said, okay, well, you're not for us, and then they're leaving in droves. Usually, you have to pick one.
But seemingly, this is a new norm than larger scale for a lot of companies as we move forward. This is not something that is kind of in this moment in time. This is kind of here. Companies are going to have to continue to work with it in order to find that growth. We're not going to go back, maybe several decades to before we saw a lot of these segments coming to the forefront.
Absolutely. And that's driven by a few things. I mean, first is the information channels we use are more porous than ever. So you can't put something in a special interest magazine and assume no other segment will see it. If you put it on social media, it could surface in anyone's algorithm, and then it can be reposted and shared, and made into a bigger deal much more easily. We use brands and products more as identity signals than ever before, whether it's to reflect my skater identity or my cool athlete identity or my political affiliations. So that's going to increase the risk of incompatibilities. And as I said, the barriers to entry are pretty low across a lot of industries now, which means one brand's conflict could be another brand's opportunity. I see you're ignoring a segment or you've done something that's bothering one. Well, I'm going to then pick them off because I can actually serve them better and more clearly.
Does artificial intelligence start to come into the conversation here with this because of, I mean, certainly AI is in so many different things right now, but you would think about the influence that it could potentially have with potentially having a connection with the consumer or not as we move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I think AI could be a useful way of testing whether there's a likelihood of conflict. First, it's a great way to measure and test the values different segments get from your brand, which segments exist, what values do they care about, how are they talking about you on social media. You could pick up on conflict sooner, do scenario planning with it, create separate messaging with it for different segments. I think it could be a really useful tool for preventing and managing conflict if it does occur, for sure.
What do you hope that will come forward from this book that you and Ryan have put forward? What's the message that you would like to send out?
Our hope is that brand managers will focus more specifically on managing brands at the segment level rather than across the whole customer ecosystem, or thinking about the brand and the customer relationship, but also recognizing that customer groups relate to each other in unique ways. And those dynamics between customers are essential to pay attention to. That's been a pretty overlooked gap in a lot of marketing research, and it's something we're hoping to draw more attention to and to offer the tools to do it.
Which becomes important because of how much there has been a focus on the relationship with the customer, especially in the last several years.
Yeah, absolutely. And so part of that customer relationship management is we call it segment relationship management. So you have to manage the relationship between the brand and the customer, but also between the customers as well.
Annie, great to have you with us today. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.
Annie Wilson, who is a co-author of the new book, The Growth Dilemma, Managing Your Brand When Different Customers Want Different Things. Thank you for listening to The Ripple Effect. If you enjoyed this episode, you can find more insightful conversations by subscribing to the Wharton School's Ripple Effect podcast on your favorite podcast platform.